Hey post-apocalyptic preppers, it's Derek from Prepper Press. This video is a spotlight on Mark Voelker, owner of the semi-famous underground home in Las Vegas. This is actually the second video in a two-part series. The first part, I'll link to below. That's where I go around the underground home following Mark with a handheld camcorder. It sets the context for this video. So if you haven't watched that one yet, I suggest you do that first. There's a link below. I hope you enjoy the video. Let me know what you think in the comments. And until next time, take care and prep on. So we're talking with Mark Voelker of who owns the Las Vegas Underground home.
The Underground House of Las Vegas.
And so you said this was built in the 1978?
The construction was completed in 1978.
When did it start?
Depends on how you define when did it start. Probably a couple of years from the time they filed plans to the time they completed it. I'm guessing it took a couple of years to build. They had to dig out the pit that we're in, and that's about 26 feet deep. And there's caliche here, so it wasn't just scooping it out. I'm guessing they used dynamite at times to dig the hole. So, it's probably a 1.5 to 2 year project from the time they filed permits to the time they completed it, I'm guessing. But it was definitely completed in 1978.
And so the original owners, did they pass on and leave it to family, or did they sell it? Or
basically, the first, Mr. Henderson, it was Mary and Jerry Henderson, Gerard B. Henderson formerly. They built this house. It was their primary residence. It wasn't just for partying or for a demonstration. It was their primary residence. And they lived here for 5 years, from 1978 until he died in 1983. He had a heart attack. And then subsequent to his passing, Mary Henderson, his widow, built most of the house that's on the surface and lived there until she died in 1989. Now, after Mr. Henderson died, she became, I don't know whether they got married or not, but they were definitely a couple. A man named Tex Edmondson, who was friends of both Mary and Jerry before Jerry died, became Mrs. Henderson's romantic partner. And when she died in 1989, he inherited this property. So I assume they were married, because that would have made it easy for him to inherit this. So after she died in 1989, Tex owned the property, and I don't think it was his primary residence. He was a real estate developer from the East, but he used it a lot when he came here to Las Vegas. And he and his family owned it until he died. And then at that point, I think his family sold it to a wealthy Chinese-American physician from Chicago who used it as a party house when he would come to Las Vegas periodically. And he owned it, and here it gets fuzzy in my mind. He must have died and passed it on to his heirs, who owned it for a while and then decided they wanted to sell. And this was the mid-2000s now, and they put it up for sale and also took a mortgage out on the property. I guess they wanted to take some money out before it actually sold. But in the mid-2000s, the real estate market crashed, and so they got caught upside down, and it went into foreclosure. And a bank, owned it for a couple of years, and then we bought it in 2014, early 2014. We've had it for 5 years now, and we fixed it up, we refurbished it, we restored a lot of the failing utilities and subsystems and fixed it up like you see here.
And so you've got it on the market now?
It is on the market now, yeah. Right.
So who do you envision to be sort of the prospective buyer? Is it a prepper survivalist? Is it somebody more looking for an eccentric property? Is it either or?
It could be either of those. Certainly, this is an iconic property here in Las Vegas. One of the few that have survived the decades, because as you probably know, whenever they're done with the building here in Las Vegas, they tend to blow it up. So, a lot of the old original casinos, like the original Flamingo, are long gone. But this is a historic structure and hasn't met that fate and probably won't. And so, anybody who's interested in owning a unique, iconic, exotic property like this, this would be something that, they'd like. Or a prepper. You have to be a wealthy prepper or a group of preppers. It would be a good place to be during mass civil unrest. Obviously, because it's underground, it's very defensible. And there's water on the surface. There's a diesel electric genset in a blockhouse. So if the grid goes down, you can have power, auxiliary power. There's plenty of space to store food for the long term.
It's deceptively. This place it's huge.
Yeah,
even if you really wanted to store more water and more food, you would have ample.
Oh yeah, there's plenty of square feet, or actually cubic feet, to store provisions. And so if you were expecting civil unrest, like the kind that LA or major cities have suffered now and then, this would be a good place to be. Or even if things got really bad and it got to a SHTF situation, if you had stocked the place with sufficient food and medicines and other supplies, and you had a group of people here to defend it against, roving bands of bad people, this would be a reasonably good place to be during a situation like that. You would need to have a group to defend it. If you were just a couple, you'd need to sleep at some point. So you'd need to have, if it's really bad, you need to have, people on the surface guarding against invasions on a shift type basis. But again, because it's underground, it would be relatively easy to defend against hostile forces trying to take over.
Yeah, I think that's kind of, I would imagine one of the conundrums, if you're looking at it from strictly a prepper perspective, is that everyone knows about it.
It's hardly a secret location.
Like Abby was saying, I know that place.
Yeah. Although a lot of people don't know exactly where it is. And even here in Las Vegas, sometimes I'll hear people talking about it. They don't even know that I live here. And they'll start telling wild tales about, what it's like underground and where it is, and I just kind of listen and go, that's interesting, because they have certain things right and a lot of things wrong. So it's known, but maybe not exactly known. But in any kind of a major SHTF situation, you're going to have active defense. You just kind of expect it. Even if you think you're in a secret, secure location, I can almost guarantee somebody knows you're there, and they're at some point going to send, a gang of bad people out to try and get you. So you're going to have to actively defend wherever you are, or just keep being on the move, constantly moving from place to place. So, this place would be a reasonably good place to be if you were prepared, if you had stocked it and provisioned it and had a group of people that were ready to, for a few weeks or months, keep the bad guys at bay.
At the surface.
Yeah, you'd have to be at the surface. You have to have people on the surface, at least several at any one time, ready to fend off the bad guys, like you saw during, the 1965 riots in LA, when the shopkeepers, with AR-15s who stood on their roof, kept the roving bands of looters away. They would go down to the next block, rather than try and tangle with somebody who had weapons on display. So I think you're going to have that kind of active defense no matter where you are. Okay, unless you're like in Cheyenne Mountain or something,
Yeah.
and even then, you'd still need to have some kind of active defense.
Yeah.
It's kind of interesting. When I went to Caltech for a while, and they have a tradition there called Senior Ditch Day, where people who are about to graduate, they leave their dorm rooms and go on a little trip. They stay away for 24 hours, and the other undergrad students are supposed to try to break into their dorm rooms, and if they're successful, they get a little goodie or a prize or something. And so the seniors try to set it up so that the undergrads can't break into their dorm rooms during this period. And there's sort of two different approaches. One's active and one's passive. Well, the passive defense is where they just like fill the door to their dorm with concrete blocks or something. Those are always broken into if they have 24 hours. I mean, they'll go get jackhammers.
Sure.
They'll But the active ones where you have to solve a puzzle or something, those are the ones that have a chance of remaining, uninvaded during the 24-hour period. So the take home there is, no matter where you are, no matter what kind of fortification you have, in terms of physical walls and stuff, you really always are going to need active defense. Okay, when a city was being besieged during medieval times, the castle or the city, okay, they always had to have people on the walls shooting back. You couldn't just sit back behind your walls and let the attackers have their way. You had to actively defend, and that's still the case today. So if you're really talking about a true mass civil unrest SHTF situation, you're going to have, no matter where you are, what kind of facility you're in, you're going to have active defense. But that being said, it'd be better to be in an underground bunker than in just a typical house on the surface.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So if the grid did go down, let's say,
right,
how long would the generator run?
I don't know. We've got a tank, thousands of gallons of diesel there. So obviously you turn off most of the lights here, and you just use it as needed. Personally, I think, having studied a little bit about possible bad scenarios, you're not going to have to be down here for a year.
Right.
I mean, if we really have an SHTF situation, all the bad stuff will probably be over within 4 to 8 weeks, because you can't last that long in a major city without food and water. I mean, maybe 8 weeks, 12 at the most.
Yeah.
So, I'm pretty confident that if you were down here and you had prepared appropriately, you'd be able to weather that storm. Now, afterwards, it's going to be a different world. You're going to have to make your way in the world.
Yeah.
But in the meantime, this would be a good place to be.
How does the air system work here? Are you getting fresh air? Is that?
So there is fresh air. There is a air intake and an air exhaust, and those are powered electrically. And if for some reason you thought there was contamination in the air of whatever, dust, pathogens, fallout, whatever, you just turn off the air intake, and given the size of this facility, the cubic feet of air down here, there's plenty of breathing air even without the intake and exhaust system going. So there you just turn off the air intake and just wait out whatever the pollution is until it blows away, and then turn it on again. Cool. So air, food, water, power, defense. And I don't know. That's pretty much it for a multi-week type of situation.
Well, I mean, if you're in Vegas a lot and you've got money and you're of a prepper mindset and you want to throw some good parties.
And you want to throw some good parties. That's right. I mean, how do you combine your defensive bunker with a great party space? That is the unique advantage this place has. We're 3 miles from the Strip.
Right.
And it's a great party pad.
For sure.
Yeah. So.
Do you sleep down here at all?
Sometimes, but I usually sleep upstairs
Yeah.
just because it's more convenient up there on a daily basis.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think the idea of prepping is good. Just it's like what people did. My grandparents. My grandfather grew up on a farm. Ended up being a college professor, but he grew up on a farm. They had a pantry. You know, they would have months worth of food. And even today, people that buy at Costco and things, if you have a pantry, it makes economic sense, right? You can buy in bulk and get cheaper food, and so why not do it that way?
Yeah.
Why only have 36 hours worth of food in your shelf?
It certainly seems like we're moving in the opposite direction in terms of each generation. Like, not many people are even going to the grocery store and stocking up on groceries anymore. Now it's more like I'm going to grab lunch on the way.
Or even I'm going to use my Uber app to order food delivered, the next dinner delivered.
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
So we're totally moving to just-in-time sort of provisioning of our lives, and we're totally dependent on this complicated but very economically efficient system. I mean, they've got just-in-time down now where most companies that sell consumer goods don't have giant warehouses full of stuff,
Yeah.
because that does cost money to maintain those warehouses and
Yeah.
to have that stock sitting there not sold. So just-in-time makes total economic sense from an efficiency standpoint, but it only works well if there's never interruptions in the system.
Right,
If there's a hiccup in the system, and suddenly you get, like when there's a hurricane coming and all the water's just cleaned off the shelves, okay, you have to yourself be a little bit aware that the system can have hiccups and interruptions, and be prepared for that by having your own little storehouse of stuff you think you might need. And that makes sense too. So think ahead.
Well, even in terms of gas, if everybody went to top off their gas tanks at the gas stations right now,
And suddenly there's a
everything's
gas
down.
shortage, right? They all run at the same time to get a few gallons of gas. There's lines and there's shortages. So just like, think that the system might suffer interruptions and hiccups.
Yeah.
Have some batteries for your flashlights, have some food stored away, some water. Here we're in the desert. Everybody ought to have a 55-gallon drum of potable water in their house. Or if you're a single living in an apartment, have 10 gallons of fresh water.
When
Come on, this is a desert.
I had posted on social media that I was going to tour this place, and if there were any questions people wanted to ask, and there were a few along those lines, like how are you prepping in Vegas given the water situation?
Well, I answered that but we know people here that don't have 1,000 gallons of fresh water, but they have like a couple 55-gallon drums full of fresh water in their garage. If there's a water shortage for whatever reason, you don't want to be in that line behind the tank truck with milk jugs waiting for your drinking water. Why not get it ahead of time? Just only makes sense.
Yeah.
The pool,
pool is a nice reservoir of water.
Yeah, for cleaning. You could drink it too, but you have to bathe, you have to do a little wash up. You can that's 12,000 gallons in this one.
Wow.
Yeah, you can boil it and make it.
And you could boil it, yeah.
Yeah.
You could probably drink out of it right
You could
now
flush the
because it's
toilet.
hardly used.
When I moved out here from Georgia, my wife was shopping around for houses. She works for the airline, and she transferred ahead of me. She was shopping around for a house. I said, be sure to get a house with a pool.
For emergency water.
Living in the desert.
Yeah.
It gave us thousands of gallons of water.
And when I moved here, like I mentioned, the headlines in the newspaper were that Lake Mead was down to 4 feet above the main water intake for the city, because the city gets a lot of its water both from groundwater but also taking it from Lake Mead. And Lake Mead was, if it went down another 4 feet, they'd be sucking air. And at that point, there would be severe water rationing imposed. And subsequent, it never actually got down to that level. And meanwhile, they were building a lower intake, digging a lower intake as fast as they could. And subsequent now, we've had a lot of water in the west here this year. There's record snowpack on the Sierra Nevada, and I'm sure throughout the Colorado River watershed, they've replenished the snowpack. So probably the immediate emergency is off, But like I said, it's still a good idea to have
Yeah.
emergency drinking water
How
in
much
the
of that-
desert.
How much of that is diverted for agricultural purposes? Isn't that a big part of the problem?
So if you're talking the whole Colorado River, the water from the Colorado River is allocated to obviously Colorado, Arizona. I think Utah gets some Colorado River water. Yeah. So Colorado, Utah, Arizona, Nevada, California, and Mexico.
Mm-hmm.
There's a treaty called the Colorado River Compact, which allocates so many acre feet of water every year to those different political jurisdictions. And, they use it for a variety of things, from water for cities to agriculture. When Arizona completed the Central Arizona Project back in the 90s, a lot of that water, which comes from the Colorado River, is used for irrigation in central Arizona, and also for Phoenix and Tucson and other cities, along the straw. But it's just like in the Roman Empire, the aqueducts are there and they have to be maintained and used. And if if that infrastructure fails, there will be a lot of troubles that result from that.
Yeah.
So, we're dependent on that infrastructure for our water. So,
So you brought this furniture was not here?
None of it was here.
So you must have, this is like vintage. Was it trouble trying to find it all?
Yeah, so you couldn't just go and buy it. So we relied on auctions
Antiques,
and estate sales.
Yeah.
And those are catch as catch can. So
Sure.
we didn't know we'd get that thing until it came up for auction and
that's
we
pretty
won
sweet.
it. So yeah, that's why it took so long to furnish the place.
Yeah.
That's how he and I met at the auction.
Yeah.
Oh, really?
Yeah. We were both, I was looking to buy furniture here, and he was bidding on some
We were
firearms
bidding on-
related stuff. And I was interested in firearms too.
I thought we were bidding on silver dimes.
No, you remember they had Front Sight had
Oh,
Had those classes.
Certificates.
Yeah, front sight certificates. Someone was selling front sight certificates, and you bid
They're
on
around here
those.
somewhere, aren't they?
And they're out by Perub. They're about an hour away or something.
Hour and a half.
Hour and a half. And he bid on that. We got talking, and I had just come from Long Beach, where I grew up, and I had been taking care of my very elderly parents, who were in their 90s, and we had this was in East Long Beach, very quiet, nice, upper middle class neighborhood. I was up at night on my laptop, and I heard this noise. I thought it was my dad, with insomnia. I didn't think but the next morning when we got up, my mom says, "Hey, we had a break-in." Somebody tried to break into the house. And apparently they'd seen that I was awake, because there was light leaking out from under the bedroom door, and they saw that, and they decided not to proceed into the house, based on the fact that they would have encountered me or somebody, and we realized that, well, the guy just as easily could have decided to come on in and guns blazing, and so it was kind of scary. And so we decided at that point we better arm up. And so we all went and bought shotguns and pistols.
Yeah.
So that if there was another break-in and the guy decided that he was going to come in and do bad stuff, that we would have had a chance. So then I moved here and I realized, I really ought to get some firearms here too, And so I was thinking of that, and he was thinking of that, and we talked about that. And
There's a lot of shooting that goes on in Vegas, like the
Yeah.
ranges and the machine gun shoots and
Yeah, well, machine gun. Yeah, I've never done the machine gun thing. I'm not that interested in machine guns per se, but we have the Clark County Shooting Complex, and I thought, this is pretty cool. The county actually maintains a place where people can go and shoot guns. I thought, that's pretty cool. That was like in Long Beach. We had the Long Beach police range was open to the public, so that's where I learned how to fire a gun. Was at the same range that the police used to keep their officers trained.
Yeah.
So it was very common back then. Like when I was in high school, we had ROTC and they brought their rifles to high school and everything. There was nothing. There was no like crazy mass shootings or anything, you know. That's all been gigged on by the crisis atmosphere that's been promoted in the media for the last 20 years. This fear of guns and this racial animosity, which has been stoked, you know, by the politics. The politics now isn't. When I grew up, the politics was inclusive. The struggle was for integration and to bring everybody together. Okay, and now everybody has to be separated and categorized into racial and ethnic and religious and economic groups, and then they set each of these groups against each other with envy and hatred, and it's stoking this violence and this hostility and this hatred, and you can really feel it in our society now. And I think, you know, it's very, very dangerous, and it's being done for reasons of political opportunism. You know, they're promoting hatred instead of promoting peace and dialogue and integration. They're promoting hatred and violence, and I think that's why it's important to be prepared now, because at some point, if people quit talking to each other, the only other way to settle differences is through violence. So if you can't speak freely about your concerns, sometimes even difficult words, if you can't say those things and talk through your differences, the only other way forward is through violence. And unfortunately, I think that's where we're headed.
Well, thanks for the tour.
Good seeing
Appreciate
you.
it.
Yeah.